Lord, thank you for giving us a world that can be known, that can be studied, that can be rejoiced in. Thank you for giving humankind the tools of the mind in order to be able to build machines, to be able to care for your creation. Grant that whatever technology we develop as a human race, it may be to our soul's benefits as well as our bodies, that we may be presented to you a holy and living sacrifice during our life and meet you as friends on the other side, having given as much of this earth back to you as holy as you have given us salvation in your Son, Jesus Christ our Lord, through whom we ask all these things in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Ghost. Amen.
Amen. And Father Ray, I know that you might have to jump off and take care of some business, but you're welcome to stay and join the conversation if you wish. Otherwise, I got a couple other exciting speakers. I have Albert and Singularity Hack. I don't know exactly what how you refer to yourself, but I haven't actually talked to either of these folks. And one of the exciting things about these spaces is I really don't know most of the people that I've been able to bring up over the past few weeks. So it's a little bit of faith, that things are going to work out. But so far we've been having some great conversations, been meeting a lot of great builders who are building our emerging future. And so that's really exciting. So maybe just to get the space started a little bit, we're obviously builders here, so we're very excited about people who are building real technology, not just, philosophizing or thinking in the space. So Albert, if you don't mind, just give us a little bit about who you are and what you do here.
Sure thing. And I just want to say it's great to be here. So thank you for the invite. My name's Albert. I run a company called Apps for Life. We've been in business for about 15 years. We mostly make mobile software. This is like consumer-facing mobile apps. That's been like our bread and butter. We have tens of millions of downloads and users from that. And then in the past few years, we've also been building military software with the U.S. military, mostly defense stuff. So that's been where a huge part of my focus has been lately. And I've also been working a lot with AI personally. I've done a few consumer-based software with my company, but I'm doing a lot of personal passion projects with the AI space. It's very fun to work in. I'm currently building a Bible app for iPhone that's AI powered, and it uses AI to analyze some of the original text in the original Hebrew and Greek and kind of help English readers be able to read the original script if they want. With some sort of like concordance, AI-powered concordance that translates all these ancient texts and correlates them to the current English translations. So that's what I'm working on there. I am a Christian. I was born again in 2012, and I'm also a futurist and a capitalist. So I'm excited to see how those can all intersect.
Yeah, and you're in Hawaii, right? So it's what? It's like what, lunchtime now?
Yeah, 12:40 over here. Very
nice.
sunny and breezy.
Yeah, well, I'm in Florida, so it's nice and sunny, breezy here too. But I think some of our northerners might be experiencing a little cold. So Singularity Hack, and again, I don't know exactly how you refer to yourself, but you can unmute. And I know you're just getting back from ETH Denver, which is super exciting, and you've done a lot of work in the blockchain and Ethereum space. So why don't you give us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. First off, again, thanks, Connor, for inviting me on here. This is the strangest overlap of the most exciting topics, right? And, so there's the niche and there's the niche of the niche on this type of stuff, right? So, yeah, my name is Justice. I go by 0x Justice, kind of in the crypto space, and, my journey has been, I went to Bible college and studied systematic theology. I kind of came up in the Reformed tradition, Reformed Baptist, and I was really interested in formal languages and kept thinking like if there was a kind of like a supercharged inductive Bible study method where you could kind of symbolically encode all propositions in the Bible and be able to infer certain unexpected things and kind of do this calculus. And that kind of thinking got me into computer science. So I went back to school for computer programming and started writing, and I took on kind of this persona of Singularity Hacker, but that's too long for the Twitter name, so I'm Singularity Hack on here. And then in the past couple of years, just went real deep on DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, and kind of org design. And then now I work on governance for Polygon Labs. So, and I'm a believer, I'm a Christian, and this informs my worldview and my hope in the world and for eternity. And it's interesting that in times past, these deeper worldview ethical questions would probably be buried much lower, when now in 2024, it's just a few minutes into current events and you're already coming face to face with what are human beings? What is our purpose? What's the end game? It's very close to the surface. So very exciting.
For sure. And then our other speakers, I actually had some family items come up, so he couldn't pop in. But he said he might come later. Zai, I don't know, it's kind of interesting. So you mentioned Singularity Hack about the questions about what it means to be a human being. And I didn't really realize how important that question was going to be until, I don't know, I mean, this conversation really just started popping off about a month ago. But it really does seem to kind of, it revolves around that question. At least us as Christians, our conversation here revolves around that question. And Zai, I know, has some concerns about certain elements of the space. And so I didn't brand the space as EAC, but I do know that both you and Albert, you call yourselves EAC. And a lot of people, obviously a lot of conversation in the space has to do with EAC. I have EAC in my bio. I'm down with the mission. But, there are some questions. There's definitely some people here that are maybe not so pro-human. And we as Christians have to have a deep respect for humanity as the image of God, the Imago Dei. And so I think that has to do with a lot of what we're hosting these conversations for, is so that we can clarify what do we as Christians believe about the future and about ourselves and about what our mission is here on earth. So maybe we could just kick off the conversation there. And I actually let me throw this up on the bulletin board. I put out a tweet maybe last week. Time flies so much. Maybe it was 2 weeks ago. But I said that EAC is a fundamentally Christian movement. And somehow that hit the algorithm, and some people obviously didn't agree. I mean, it was kind of a meme. But I think there's a lot of truth there. And so Soul Engineer, an Orthodox Christian, was on our last space, and he responded that no, it wasn't a fundamentally Christian movement, but that to survive long term, it will need to be. So, and I think maybe that might be a good conversation starter. Being what do we think as Christians? What do we need EAC? Do we need Techno-Optimism? Why is this an important conversation? Like, why are we here? So I just shared it. Are you guys seeing it? I'm not seeing it. I just shared it to the bulletin. Albert, are you seeing it?
Yeah, it is there on my screen.
Okay. I don't know why it's not on my screen. Twitter spaces are kind of weird, but, I don't know. I mean, what's your answer here, Albert? I know you were at the original space and you tried to speak, but, unfortunately you had to jump off before you got a chance. So you tell me, you're EAC. Why are you EAC, and why do you think Christians should be here?
Well, I think I would agree that it's probably not fundamentally Christian, although I do appreciate the meme. I do think what is happening is we're seeing an interesting scenario wherein the people that are not of the faith are kind of divided on this topic because they have a type of fear towards what the future is going to look like. Hollywood has probably exacerbated that quite a bit with movies like The Terminator. Whereas Christians have a confidence in what the end times are going to be like. And it doesn't seem, well, there's two sides to this coin. First of all, it doesn't seem to be at the hands of an AGI gone rogue. Even if you read books like Revelations with an interpretation like that, there's nothing you can do to stop it because that's divine prophecy. So I think for Christians, there is no fear, there is no P-doom, so to speak. So I feel that most Christian tech founders are probably on board with the EAC movement for that reason. Whereas if you're not in that religious sphere, it seems to be divided maybe 50-50 or something, where some people are on board while others are very hesitant that this might spell the end of humanity, so to speak. So I do think we're seeing a concentration effect happen where people of the faith are much more on board with going forward with this. My personal belief is that our goal as Christians, obviously our number one goal is to bring glory to God, love our neighbors as ourselves. But I do believe that we also have these secondary duties to, for example, feed the poor, house the homeless, take care of the orphans and widows and sick. And in my opinion, as a capitalist, the best way to do that is to advance technology. So I see it not only as compatible with Christianity, I actually see it as a duty for Christians. So I think that would be my stance in terms of how that all relates.
Yeah, and Singularity Hack, I mean, what do you think? I haven't actually talked to you, so I don't know if you were in the original space. You tell me, but you are EAC, so why, as a Christian?
Because, it's a choice between evils, and the one evil, in my opinion, is infinitely worse than the other. Fundamentally, EAC is pro-freedom, private property. It embraces the creation mandate to be fruitful, multiply, and have dominion over the earth. And without acknowledging divine revelation, the human mind has to make up some new religion, and the new religion it's made up is basically a fear-mongering kind of no purpose, with the only salvation is some totalitarian regime that decides what freedoms you have or what you can own or not own. And if it deems one day you have too much, then the next guy takes it away and gives it to them. So it's fundamentally anti-capitalist, anti-freedom. And I think that's the greatest threat. And so for some people to come out and formulate a movement to say, listen, we've all been wrong, because all of Western civilization has just been a continuous psyop to convince us that freedom and privacy is the greatest danger. That's the story on why the Great Depression happened. And this is the story why we accept like 40% tax rate, and this is kind of, redistribution, and it's destroying everything. And so, I don't think EAC is Christian, but the worldview, a Christian worldview, embraces many of the same principles. And I would agree with Albert too, that we're protected from some of the fear mongering because we already have divine revelation that says there's no amount of computation that turns a computer into a human being. We already know that. We already know that the game here is to be fruitful and multiply. We don't need to be sucked down some Malthusian fear monger and we're going to have too many babies, right? And so we have these guardrails that protect us from this, kind of fear, and that changes the way we see everything.
I think it does, but I do think, and I mean, this is kind of a conversation I've been playing with for at least a year now. I do think that there is an element of a rather strong element of Christianity that is definitely scared of some of these developing technologies, or at the very least, extremely cautious. And I think there's probably a few reasons for it, but just for example, so in the first space we hosted, I brought up Michael Whittle, and he's developed this AI he's calling Pulpit AI, which is a tool to help pastors develop content based off their sermons. So initially when it launched, people thought it was writing sermons. That's not the case. So obviously some of the concerns there were misguided. But even after, people have questions about how appropriate is it to incorporate AI and technology into these very fundamentally human aspects of Christianity and really even society at large. And so a lot of Christians too are going to point to, Tower of Babel type use cases. Like, are we building something that is fundamentally replacing God or replacing our place in this divine plan of creation? And so to some aspects, I am personally of the opinion that we have to encourage more Christians to be building in this space, especially since we are talking about literally building the future. Like, we need Christians here more than anything. And I think if a Christian does have those fears, that's exactly why they should be participating. But I also think that we have to articulate a reason, a Christian reason for tech optimism that respects humanity as the image of God. And I'm not sure that we've entirely been able to do that. I think there's actually a lot of good things about EAC that could potentially help us do that. But at the same time, there's obviously elements here that maybe would call themselves transhumanists, which what does that even mean? But then some that even just explicitly call themselves post-humanist. So we kind of have to deal with those forces as well. Okay. So let's think about the Tower of Babel specifically. How do we know that when we're building AGI, when we're building, virtual reality, how do we know we're not building the Tower of Babel? And also, anybody who's who's listening, if you want to jump in, you have something to contribute, please do. Go ahead and request to speak. I'll bring you up. This is an open conversation for Christians. And honestly, in the last few spaces, we've had a lot of non-Christians as well that have been very respectful and have joined the convo. So anybody who wants to speak, please do. But you guys tell me, Albert and Ray, Father Ray, if you want to unmute, you're welcome to as well. But what do you guys think? How do we know we're not building the Tower of Babel?
Just to clarify before we get started, when you say building the Tower of Babel, I just want to make sure we're talking about the same thing. Are you talking about this notion that humanity is trying to become God?
I mean, maybe. I think the Tower of Babel story is obviously maybe somewhat vague on exactly what was the erroneous application of that. But it was a technology that was fundamentally against God's plan for humanity, at least at that time. So it's definitely going to be something that Christians are going to do as an example of why we need to be cautious about building technologies. But what's your take?
I mean, the Tower of Babel, that's more of there was an explicit command to spread all over the earth, and instead mankind refused to leave the plane of Shinar and built this tower to assault heaven. So it was a direct, middle finger towards the Almighty, which never works well for us. But it was also a explicit form of disobedience. I'm definitely, it's ironic that Connor invited me to speak or to give the opening prayer, just because I wind up falling more in a skeptical category, recognizing that there's many incredible things what you're saying about there's some incredible things and these things are going to happen. So we need the work to be done. My capitalism growing up has gotten a little bit shaky thinking about worker displacement and what happened the last major technological revolution with the introduction of the printing press. So those are the questions that I have. There were obviously many good things that came out of the Reformation. But there was a breakdown in society in a lot of ways, that I'm concerned about those questions. With this being a major technological breakthrough, how does that affect people? For instance, Instagram reels of construction worker robots outplacing low-skilled workers, and recognizing that there are always going to be people who can contribute economically with their bodies that can't contribute with their minds necessarily. But if the technology gets carried away, what are these unskillable workers going to be doing? And is that truly providing for the poor? Those are my skepticisms, and I know some of them have already been broached, so I would push the question more that direction.
Yeah, I'd love to respond to some of that. And thank you for the insights regarding the Tower of Babel. I do think, Connor, if we are headed in that direction, the best we can do as Christians is to just do what we know is right to do and trust on the Holy Spirit to guide us. Now, if we reach a point where it becomes clear and you have conviction in your soul and your spirit that you are, headed in the wrong direction with this, well, then I'm happy to change my stance and no longer consider myself Christian EAC. Touching on some of the stuff that Ray brought up, though, I do want to say I have a lot of strong opinions about where I think EAC and also just AI development in general, this new revolution, this new industrial revolution, so to speak, is going to take humanity. I do think it's going to be a net good. I understand the concerns, and these are just my opinions, but I do understand the concerns for worker displacement. I personally think we're going to see a really wonderful transformation, and this is why I believe that. I myself am an employer. I was self-employed as a sole proprietorship, which just means I ran the company myself with no employees for quite some time. I do now. I'm blessed now to have some staff. But during that time, I learned that you can create a lot of value and also sustain yourself just by yourself. You can run a company by yourself. Now, it's easier when you have employees. The beauty of AI is that it allows the individual to now have employees they can command. And those are the AIs. Now, we can go a little further down the road and talk about robots. And we are starting to see that in physical real world robots. We're starting to see that in warehouses and stuff. But I think what this revolution really does more than anything is, rather than displace workers, I think it dissolves the employee-employer model. I think everyone is going to essentially become their own employer, essentially. Rather than working for someone and producing their dreams, everyone will be producing their own dreams and using AI to bring that forth. Now, this is a little further down the road, and there is going to be a transitional period where it's a little rough. And we're going to have to rely on different institutions to hopefully make that a smoother transition. But I do think long term, that's where we're headed. I think it's going to be an ultimate good in that sense. But yeah. Going back to the Tower of Babel concept real quick for a second. I don't know that we're going to be building things necessarily to do something in the sense of making man more closer to God or in the image of God, if you want to think about it symbolically that way. And there's a lot of different ways to interpret what the intention behind the Tower of Babel was. But I do think there's a lot of good that Christians can do in the meantime in this space, and it's kind of our duty to put real quick, to explain how I think the way AI builds on itself. I view it kind of with a hierarchical model, similar to mathematics, how suppose you're in middle school, each year the math all builds on the math that you learned in the previous years, right? I think AI is kind of going to build in a similar way. The initial kind of directions and influences we put into it now are going to reverberate into the future. And so I do think it's really important that Christians are building in the space, that we're putting our data and our ethics and our understanding into some of these patterns that are going to be replicated into the future. So I don't know much how that relates to Tower of Babel, but I do think it's good that we put our fingerprint into it if it's going to happen either way. And as I touched on earlier, we just have to trust on the Holy Spirit to guide us if we're not supposed to be doing that.
I know Ian jumped up on the speakers panel, so if you want to jump in here, you're welcome to. But I brought up the Tower of Babel specifically just because just in conversations on Twitter, most Christians that maybe would not be techno-optimists or at least techno-skeptics, a lot of them are going to point to that example. They do. So I agree with you, Albert. I'm not entirely sure, applications, obviously we can talk about, you and Father Ray, pointed out there was obviously an explicit command there that project was disrespecting. But I think there are parallels to some extent, particularly when we're talking about AGI and we're talking about its potential to replace humanity, that has people concerned, that maybe parallels something of the Tower of Babel story there. We're building a technology that maybe we need to be very careful about how we build it, or, we need to maybe have some safeguards on it. But because we're in the EAC movement, right, we particularly talk about not wanting to have some of these AI safety guardrails and why that's actually not productive to development. And I'm not giving my point of view here. I'm just kind of giving you guys a landscape of what I'm seeing, how I'm seeing the conversation develop on Twitter. So I think it's relevant because I think we need to be pushing a conversation that encourages more Christians to join this space, more Christians to be building, because over the past few hundred years, I think Christianity has taken a step back and has kind of opposed a lot of projects for even some of the reasons the same concerns that Father Ray brought up with the Industrial Revolution and how some of these things in the Enlightenment maybe explicitly set themselves up as opposed to the church's vision of the world. And so because of those reasons, Christians maybe think that science or a lot of technology is kind of the domain of anti-Christians, and so they don't participate. And we're talking about building the future. If we don't participate, then who's building the future? Non-Christians, right? So that's really, I guess, my fear in the space. So I want us to help encourage more Christians to get involved. And to do that, we almost do need to be EAC. So Soul Engineer says, I think EAC needs Christianity, not the other way around. But I actually do think Christianity needs elements of this techno-optimism message. And it's already there. It's not like we need to add something to Christianity. The message is already there. We just need to articulate it. So I'm just hoping these spaces can help us do that. And I know you have your hand up there, Singularity Hack, so please join in.
Yeah, I think the analogy of the Tower of Babel is amazing. It's fantastic, and there's nuances there, right? Because the line that sticks out to me is when God is communing within himself, the Trinity, and he says, if we don't stop them here, I'm paraphrasing, then there's nothing they won't be able to do, basically when he confused the languages. And the effect of this AI will effectively destroy any language barriers, real-time communication throughout the whole world instantly, right? And even far more than that. So it is comparable. And I'm not even sure I like the term techno-optimist. I mean, I see what it's getting at, but it's almost like saying this, like, has the internet been a net good or bad for the world? If that's a nuanced statement. You say, well, of course it's been good. Well, it's also been used for human trafficking and all kind of terrible things, pornography, all this stuff, right? And so, like, the same technology that makes free energy with nuclear also makes the nuclear weapons. And so we would be naive to think that this is going to be universally good. It's going to produce the most dystopian, strange things. But the core question, though, to come back to is, does it even make sense to talk about should we be, quote unquote, cautious, or should we slow down? There is no slowing down. It's happening. It's kind of like discussing like whether we should allow the tornado to come this direction. It's coming. The conversation has to be about positioning, maneuvering, because the only people who are talking about slowing down or whatever, they have to, by definition, endorse totalitarianism, violation of privacy, searching out data centers, bombing. These are the crazy people who are talking about, oh, we need to control this, control the narrative. And for the Christian, at a spiritual level, at the deepest level, life is war. It's war within your spirit. It's war in the world. And as you've seen recently with the botched deployment of Gemini, the AI is going to arrive. It's either going to be an antichrist, woke, coded monstrosity, or there's going to be competition among different voices, synthetic AI voices that mitigate against those dangers,
Again, just taking the techno-skeptic realm in the room, how would you get 20th century totalitarianism without the rise of radio and television for centralized government to control things? That IA era that we're talking about, that is a tool of totalitarianism rather than a defense of it.
Okay. So you're saying that the tool is the very means by which you get totalitarianism, not a thing against it. I would say this. You could say it's both and it's coming on the evil side, and so you better have it on the freedom side. So just right now, you have state-run media. They're pushing forth a certain message, and if you don't have other channels, if you don't have the open marketplace of ideas and the ability to express voice and say the hope is the resurrected God, man, then you've been destroyed. Okay. And so I think that's one of the reasons why there's such an attempt to control this technology, is because, like the internet, like the printing press, it's a loss of control over the narrative, where information is freely available. Now you're not just getting one statistical report on CNN. You're literally having access to the data. You're being able to interact with it, the statistics, the real data, what's happening. And it's very scary to basically a regime governed by the Prince of Darkness,
Connor, one thing that I might say about the Tower of Babel is I think the sort of knee-jerk Tower of Babel comparisons when we're talking about techno-optimism or futurism sort of prove too much. However you want to interpret that specific story and the ethical application of it. You know, when someone, for example, says, well, we shouldn't focus on space exploration because that kind of detracts us from the immediate needs of our neighbor and we need to focus on the here and now and not the far away. You know, that same argument would have led the Greeks to not leave the Aegean, would have led people in the old world to not sail to and discover the new world. There's really no kind of rational principle you can use to delineate this expansion from that expansion. There's no rational principle that you could use to say, you know, well, further technological development would be bad, but contemporary medicine is good, right? These are all really arbitrary lines. And I think the only, in terms of what we should do in the here and now and what our ethical obligations are, the only rational line that I can think of for Christians to draw is to say, if there is technology that can be used in a certain way which overrides aspects of our created nature that God created as good, which overrides our, you know, bearing of the Imago Dei, which are anti-human. One aspect of our created nature that God created as good is human variety, right? So, yeah, I mean, in a sense, I think you could make a compelling argument for if we use technology in a way that eliminated all language, insofar as God created different nations and languages as a positive good, that would be a bad use of that technology. And Christians should participate in the conversation to kind of do what we can to prevent that from happening. But the technological development in and of itself is never going to be unethical when it can be used to serve the least of these, to improve people's lives, to make all things new, and to put all of creation under our dominion.
Yeah, great points, guys. And I am reminded too, just again from a previous conversation. Actually, the first conversation we had with Bays, I thought one thing that was super interesting was when we were talking about, I guess, techno-optimism or even just future optimism in general. The Christians in the space were the ones who were ultimately optimistic. You know, we have this vision, this Christian vision of this eschatological vision, really, of ultimately a future where we win, right? Where Christianity expands to overtake all of creation, and God has this plan predestined, preordained. So because of that, we ultimately do have, and I think even you, Singularity Hack, I think you pointed out that Christianity has this, or maybe it was Albert, I forget, at the beginning, that we are optimistic and we have very intentional reasons to be. And Bays particularly, and I think he's actually a smart guy, and I've appreciated conversing with him. But I have to go back and clip the space because he basically said, well, he's not so optimistic. He's more of a realist. He's like, well, the technology is going to develop. We can't stop it. It just is what it is. And that's not ultimately an optimistic message, is it? It's just kind of it's a realist message. And so I think the Christians in the space, we have actually something positive to convey to the world, and we need to do that. So, Dan, I don't think I've spoken to you, but you just unmuted. Go ahead.
Hey, how you doing? Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, I can. Please.
I'm from Australia. I'm from Brisbane, so it's the northern part of Australia. I'm a CEO of 3 tech companies in Australia. We run one of the largest virtual tour companies in the country, where we fly drones through leading universities and schools. I'm a Christian. I've got a family of 3 kids and wife. It's lots of fun. And honestly, I'm just real honored to be in this space, guys, because I think a lot of this stuff's really being led out of America currently. I've really seen a huge turning point where, basically ever since Twitter got bought by Elon Musk, freedom of expression and this whole EAC movement has kind of just sprung up out of that, and everyone's trying to build an optimistic future. Like I was sort of, I don't know what you guys are like when you grew up as a kid. I'm, I think, 32 now, and my whole childhood was being brought up in this sort of doomerism, right, in school, where we're taught about, climate change, had the global financial crisis. It's just been doom, 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 and doom. And it's exciting to see, basically millennials, Gen Z, and just people in general go, you know what, it doesn't have to be this way. Let's just freaking send it. Let's build rockets. Let's, 10x our energy output with fission. It's exciting. And I think, Christians have a huge role to play in it. Like if you look at the Catholic Church, and all the stuff that it did through all the, middle centuries, we're the ones that built the hospitals. We're the ones that invented, like you went to the local cathedral to learn how to do better agriculture. So the embracing of technology is, definitely a God-given thing. We were instructed to subdue the earth, not in the sense of let's just burn everything and, we've got to be good stewards, right? And I think I've also started to notice even people who are really staunch atheists that I went to, like when I went to uni with, where we would debate all the times whether God was real. Like we had that huge, new atheist thing with Richard Dawkins for a while and everyone's saying God's dead. A lot of those people have been actually talking to me recently saying that Christians are the only ones left with any hope or optimism. And it's just really interesting. There's a real switch happening in the world right now. And I'll be honest, I'm really excited because, like you can, all of a sudden, like, all this AI technology and EAC is about democratizing everything. So all of a sudden, a 10-year-old can start doing Disney films with the new, OpenAI Sora. Like that's incredibly exciting. I'm also a filmmaker as well. So like there's just so much technology. I think ultimately it is fundamentally a good thing. Yes, there is a risk it can turn into a Tower of Babel, particularly with like apps like 11 Labs where all of a sudden everyone can speak a foreign language with their own tone. Like there's obviously lots of risks, but I think fundamentally I agree with you, Connor, with, the whole idea of, we as Christians need to lead the space, come together, articulate the risks, articulate the benefits, and, pray for each other and really, take ownership and lead the space going forward. So, thanks so much for having me.
No, thanks. Really appreciate it, Dan. And real quickly before we continue the conversation, but I appreciate you brought up that you're Catholic. And Father Ray, he's actually Anglican, so we have a bunch of Protestants here. Vincent, he's also Catholic. I don't know.
I'm actually Pentecostal. Sorry.
I'm sorry. I thought you said the Catholic Church. Fair enough.
Look, in a sense, like if you look at the broad church, right? In a sense, we are all, Christians, right? So, so when I refer to the Catholic Church, like that's what we were really until the Great Schism with the Reformation, right? But, you look at fundamentally from 300 AD till 1600 AD, the church was the center of everything. And it's where you went to. It was like your Twitter. It's where you went for innovation. So we need to come back to that place.
No, totally. And that's basically what I was going to say is, even our last space we had Orthodox. So the space was opened in prayer with a Catholic. We had Soul Engineer and Carlos who are both Orthodox speaking. I'm Protestant. We had a number of other Protestants on board. So we actually have an extremely ecumenical movement here. And I don't know if everybody understands like why I harp on that, but I think that's so important too, that we need to pull all Christians on board with this message. And if we have anything to contribute to EAC, I think ultimately it lies in that Christianity has this unity message, and we need to unify the human machine to build this future this effective future that we desire to see. So that's kind of another aspect of this message that I think we really need to push hard. I know Albert has his hand up. Vincent just joined and has been unmuting. Let's go to Vincent first and then jump to Albert.
Yeah, just a short comment on what you were saying. But I've had it explained to me in the past that it is almost an insult to Christ to not utilize the gifts that he has given you. So just do the stuff that you're good at, I guess. That's all. Thanks.
Go ahead, Albert.
Yeah, I just want to chime in real quick on the Tower of Babel stuff. I don't want to go too far off topic, but I want to give my kind of view on that. From what I've understood reading that narrative in the Bible, and I read the Bible, by the way, in a very symbolic way. I think a lot of it is symbolism. But to me, what the issue there was not that humans were all speaking the same language, rather that they were united in trying to, quote unquote, reach the heavens or in a way make themselves equivalent to God or even to become God. So I think God's dispersion of languages and confusion of languages was not something that's more so a divine decree and it has to be that way forever. Rather, it was just a tool utilized at the time to prevent something like that happening at that moment. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with getting to the point where humanity's all speaking one language, whether that's accomplished through technology or through education. So I just wanted to chime in my viewpoint there.
No, I appreciate that. And 100%. So I put a couple tweets out, but again, with this message of Christian unity, what we're doing with the church, it's fundamentally, so you said symbology. Some Christians would call that typology, but there's definitely a lot of typology going here. And, particularly with the Tower of Babel, you have to realize the inverse of the Tower of Babel, the division of humanity, the division of the language is ultimately unified at Pentecost, at the institution of the church, when the apostles at that time, communicated in languages that all understood. And so fundamentally what the church is doing is we are uniting all of humanity through time. And it's obviously a project that has taken at least now 2,000 years, and there's still yet time to go. But that's what our mission is here. And if we can unite all of humanity, imagine what we could accomplish, right? And that's accomplished through the church, through Christ. And that's a beautiful message. And that's the kind of message that we need to be pushing here. So I appreciate that, Albert. Justice, go ahead. And I'm not going to change the topic, but I am going to throw another tweet on the board, particularly if we're going to talk about Tower of Babel. I think maybe this is an example of a Tower of Babel moment that we might need to answer as Christians. Go ahead, Justice.
Yeah, I would say to 1+1 what Albert was saying about the breaking down language barriers. I think the nuance there is to say that humanity was seeking to assert itself as equal with God, and that his response was to say, hey, we're going to slow this because we're not dealing with an unfallen, species. We're dealing with a species where what pours forth from his heart is corruption and enmity with God. And so the idea is like, you have to slow this capability down, because when you have at its core fallen and corrupted thing, if it has unlimited ability, it's a scary and dangerous thing. And so all that to say that I don't see anything morally wrong with unifying language, but it does represent an interesting possibility, and something that can't be forgotten is, what are the consequences now when you do have, our species unified with greater power than they've ever had, let's say in the next 5 years, what that looks like with AI, no language barriers and all this, right? Like, what does that look like? And based upon your eschatology, your view of end times, most people would say, well, things kind of get worse and more heated in this war between the claims of Christ and the claims of sinners, right? And so, that is a hot issue, I just want to add 2 little points on here I think are interesting, and that is the creation of AI was inevitable. And I think there's something cool here where God made man in his image, and the ultimate, like one of the biggest acts that man does in his dominion is to create synthetic agents in his image. And so there's an inevitability to this thing, which is profound. But then on top of that, I think what distinguishes maybe some people's view of EAC and Christianity is, we know we're not creating our own savior in this entity, right? Our savior is God. And so there's a distinction there, but at the end of the day, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And so there's nuance in that.
Yeah, Ian, you can go ahead and pipe in here. Also, listeners, if you want to speak, please just request. I know we're talking about mimetic language, and I've been trying to get Ollie on board. So if you want to join in here, I know that's really your bread and butter. Please join. Anybody who wants to talk, just send a request. Go ahead, Ian.
I just wanted to play devil's advocate on the language thing. I don't necessarily have a super hard and fast view on this, but this is probably good to explore a little bit, because we were all kind of agreeing on everything up until this point. I'm inclined to think more probably than not it'd be bad if everyone spoke the same language, and that might be at least some aspect of the Tower of Babel story. And I would say, kind of as a matter of baseline principle, I mean, every time the New Testament kind of talks about differences between men and women, it usually, especially Paul in the epistles, usually justifies them by reference to, the metaphysical order or the fundamental nature of the created order. Like, God himself is interpersonal, is a variety of persons, and so therefore it's inherently good that men and women are different and embody this interpersonal nature of the metaphysical order of the Godhead or of the created order. There's these deep differences embedded in creation, and variety is good. Uniformity is bad. So I think if you kind of extend that theme, you can see why it'd be inherently good to have different languages, different cultures, different nations. And you can see this on an intuitive level, insofar as, Albert was talking earlier about it's beneficial to have employees. Certainly one reason it's beneficial is that you get a variety of perspectives. And maybe you're more likely to get a variety of perspectives if you have different cultures. You're more likely to have different cultures if you have different languages. I mean, even just anyone who knows a couple of languages knows you're forced to think in a different frame of mind when you speak in one language instead of another. And so there's probably just intuitively some inherent benefit to having people kind of think in different frames of mind as a result of speaking different languages. And that's probably an inherent good. And the last thing I'll say on that is, I mean, you can sort of see in historic anti-Christian movements, in Marxism especially, opposition to Christianity tends to involve seeing uniformity as a positive good and having a desire to sort of deaden and flatten everything and make it monotonous, and tends to see Christianity as bad because it upholds human difference and variety. So I think you can sort of sense spiritually there that probably if something is moving us closer to uniformity, it's value negative. Although again, I don't necessarily have a hard and fast position on that. Maybe there's an exception for language, and it'd be a net benefit if we all spoke just the same language. But I'm inclined to think probably not.
Yeah, Albert, go ahead.
Yeah, so, I'm not inherently against there being multiple languages. I actually do tend to agree that it's good to have differences. I think we've kind of, with the age of the internet, we've kind of moved towards a sort of monoculture, if you will. So I do like having the variety and diversity. I guess what I'm more excited about is the dissolving the language barriers, I should say. It's actually funny that this topic is being brought up, given what I'm currently working on in the AI space, which I referenced at the start of this space. I'm working on an AI app that uses AI to help bridge this kind of gap between the original Hebrew, the original Aramaic of the Old Testament, and the original Greek of the New Testament. There's a lot of nuance and differences in these languages that aren't captured in English. And unfortunately, one of the issues when we translate the Bible into English is there's a lot of words, for example, in Hebrew, that will have kind of multiple meanings, and they allow for multiple interpretations, and it gives more depth to a sentence. And then when we translate to English, we don't have a synonym that also has those multiple meanings, and so we just have to pick one. I can give an example just off the top of my head. You've all heard the phrase that you should fear God. And the original Hebrew for that word fear it's a complex word. It means fear, but it also it can mean revere. And it's like to hold and sovereignty, so you might picture like someone trembling and bowing before a king, and so that's something that a native Hebrew speaker gets to understand when they read the scripture. Someone reading in English who's forced to deal with the translation, well, they just get one of those interpretations, and it's whatever the translator decided. And in this case, it looks like we went with the word fear, and this leads to a lot of confusion with English speakers where they think, why should, especially non-Christians, they'll hear something like that and think, why should I worship or love a God that I have to fear? And it's an issue of the language barrier. So I do think AI plays a really good role in helping kind of bridge that gap. And I think it is a good thing to bridge in some cases.
I like having a little bit of disagreement. And originally, Zai was going to be a controversy on the panel. But he still might pop in a little bit later. Yeah, so I know we all kind of agree on this message, which is helpful too, because in the last few spaces, they were a little bit bigger and we had a lot of non-Christians in, and so that kind of became the focal point. So I'm kind of glad that we're able to talk here among a lot of great Christians and kind of nail down viewpoints on this. To your points, Ian, I think it's interesting. I do think that there is an aspect of what it means to be the image of God, where we have to look at the picture of the Trinity and how there was one being, one God, but yet three persons, and they maintain their distinctness while being one. And that's something that we image in humanity, where we have in the church specifically as the body of Christ, as one body, where we become the church, yet we still maintain our distinctness. And so how exactly that looks, I mean, that's obviously can be up for debate. I'm inclined to think particularly with language, because the division of language was instituted at the Tower of Babel purposely to separate humanity. I'm inclined to think that needs to unify in the future. I don't know. I mean, maybe I do think it's somewhat interesting, some of the points Albert brought up, that there might be a way that we can still maintain separate languages, but we can we definitely need to, I guess, increase our communication in a way that's going to help us unify. And I think that's particularly important because with EAC, you know, they like to talk about the techno-capital machine and how this is going to help us, propel us, to accelerate us into the future. And as great as capital is, as great as, you know, that can be a coordination mechanism, ultimately the best coordination mechanism to me, and I think hopefully to many Christians, is the church, that we can unify on one vision that's articulated to us in the scriptures and articulated to us by God. And I think that that coordination mechanism is ultimately what's going to accelerate us into this effective future that we all imagine. So the more we can kind of communicate that, I think is going to be great. Okay, well, maybe that if anybody wants to pipe in there with some comments there, but otherwise, I did throw up this on the board, and like I said, I didn't brand the space as EAC specifically, so I know there's a few people. Father Ray is still here. He probably doesn't even know what EAC is. It stands for Effective Accelerationism, and it's this tech-optimism movement that's kind of catapulted into the Twitter conversation in the past, I don't know, year and a half. And so a lot of the conversation has started about Christianity's compatibility specifically with some tenets of EAC. And the funny thing is, I mean, there aren't really a whole lot of tenets of EAC. It's kind of an open conversation what EAC really means. But there are elements of EAC that might consider themselves post-human. Well, there's transhumanism, so we can talk about maybe what that might mean. But I think more interesting specifically is this conversation of post-humanism. And obviously that's incompatible. I mean, maybe somebody would disagree, but I would say that's incompatible with Christianity, especially as we talk about humanity being the image of God. We need to articulate a pro-human message. So maybe if we're talking about building an AGI that's going to be post-human, maybe that's an example of a quote-unquote Tower of Babel, bad technology. And if that is the case, do we need to do something to prevent that? How do we need to shift the conversation? I mean, and ultimately, how can we talk to Christians and explain why, you know, we're not building a post-human AGI? Anybody have any thoughts there? Okay, well, Ollie go ahead, Justin. Yeah, and Ollie just joined too, so why don't you jump in too?
I think just as the Christian has to balance the tension between humans having an innate glory and dignity and being in the image of God, and the terrible tragedy of the fall, and the fact that from the center of fallen man's heart proceeds darkness. Like it's a crazy thing, and you look out into the world and you can see all the properties of both of those. It's very, in the same way, that same kind of viewpoint has to be applied to this technology, right? And so, like, there will be no limit to the perverse weirdness that's going to come out of this, and it would be incredibly naive for us to not kind of see that and extrapolate that out. At the same time, we have to say, well, this is how all technology works. Like, what are the good uses here, and to preserve and double down on that. And so, I think there's value in both, and it's almost too simplistic, because I posted an article I wrote a few months ago called "Everything You Want to Hear About the Future of AI Relationships," and you know, someone could read that and be like, "Oh, well, you must be against." I'm like, "No, it's inevitable. I'm just saying, like, this is what is going to be part and parcel with that package, you know." And definitely agree with you. Like, there's no you know, post-human is a concept and it is an aspiration, but it's kind of like the pursuit of immortality in this world. It's unattainable, and that's one thing that Christians save ourselves from wasting cycles on is pursuing something that, is just not a part of the possibility within this particular time space,
Yeah, and I mean, I'm actually kind of inclined to agree with you. I mean, I don't think post-humanism is even a possibility in this future, in this world. And so in EAC language, I don't think that there needs to be safeguards to prevent us from achieving post-humanism, because I just don't think it's a possibility. Rather, I just think it's a waste of time. It's not "quote unquote" effective. It's not effective accelerationism if we're going to achieve post-humanism. I don't think an AGI is going to replace humanity. It's a tool that can propel us into a greater future.
One of the craziest examples, real quick, of current day post-humanism is, consider this kind of paradox and tension is, non-Christians believe, hey, we are kind of accidental mutation from apes over millions of years, and we're just animals. Okay. This has nothing to do with the creator or anything like that. But at the same time, from that same mind share comes people who say, actually, just by sheer will, we can actually change our gender. And so right there you have, on the one hand, saying we're merely animals, we're merely biological, nothing more. And at the same time, the idea that we have such a power that just by will we can change. And so you have this tension, even in a fallen mind share, between these two contradictions of a fight against a God, and also like the inability to deny our own kind of transcendence as being more than animals,
Justice, a quick question for you. When you talked about us not attaining immortality in this world, of course, there you're excluding the new heaven and the new earth, in which we will, have been delivered from biological death. All things are made new. I see the traditional understanding of the new heaven and the new earth as a future state of this world. So this universe is actually made new. We're not just in sort of a non-material or platonic world. Were you kind of excluding the new heaven and the new earth there because you see it as an immaterial reality, or just kind of for the sake of convenience?
I'm 100% with you. I'm just saying we're not on the spectrum right now. We're like, oh, we found the discovery. Now we live 800 years and we don't die. It's like, listen, this whole thing's going to play out where Jesus comes back. He makes the new heavens and a new earth. He restores. He judges the wicked and the death. We're resurrected into immortal bodies, and we build on earth. And in all the ways that we fall short now because of moral peccability and noetic effects of sin, like all that's taken away. And so I am in 100% agreement with the way you just described it. Yeah.
Hey, I've loved. I've been here in a moment, but I've really loved listening. I will say I'm not like an active Christian. I wouldn't want to say that I'm not Christian, and that I do look towards Jesus and Christian theology and other things for my like sense of existence or something like that. And and yet at the same time, like I haven't really kind of really fallen into like faith in a way where I would kind of claim that I'm Christian. And I have considered doing that and joining some church or whatnot, but I am a futurist transhumanist, and strive to or desire to be post-human. And I do also though like reject some kinds of post-humanism. There's a sense of like transhumanists as like wanting to leverage technology to improve the human condition and to kind of advance as a species, and that can be seen as like trying to increase our health, cognition, emotion capabilities, like increase just our kind of beings towards kind of greatly enhanced states that are beyond the current human being. And I see those things as like kind of technologically possible. And I guess I would wonder, like in your guys' mind, what I guess I would imagine it's something about like the fallen state, that with while fallen, like that we cannot achieve kind of heaven on earth, that we need divine intervention in order to kind of reach greater states. And yet for me, I definitely see like the technological possibilities of I mean, our doctors and our entire medical establishments already, increased our lifespans dramatically. And I think if you look at current like simulated biology technology, like CRISPR, mRNA vaccines, all of these kinds of directions and possibilities, it's hard to say that we won't cross the threshold where we really do conquer kind of the biology. And so I guess I just wonder, like, why would you guys think that we can't leverage technology to kind of escape the worst parts of the human condition, and why do we need Christianity to do that? Thanks.
Yeah, and maybe you can just clarify for me real quick, because I think you said you strive towards post-humanism, but then what you're describing sounds to me like you want to improve the human condition.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, just to clarify, there's kind of two kinds of post-humanism, or post-humanism contains a whole host of different concepts, and often it's confused as anti-humanism is a form of post-humanism, or like post-humanism where we create an alternative species. But I'm very much a speciesist, but also I desire like one form of post-humanism is seen as like the transhumanist goal, like the goal of transhumanism is for humans to become post-humans. But in that process, still a desire to, for some people who strive for that, to kind of cherish some aspects of our humanity and still would want to claim we're human, but just would claim that we have post-human capacities along the lines of health, cognition, or emotion, or other kinds of capacities.
okay, I'll throw it to Albo since he has his hand up. But I will just say, I think that this transhumanism, post-humanism conversation would actually be good to happen maybe sometime in the future if we have the right speakers for it. But it's the language is just so vague, and obviously you clarified exactly what your position is, but there's other people who define these terms differently, and so it's just not a very easy conversation. I don't think there's anything necessarily. I don't think Christians have a problem with improving the human condition. So I don't think that. I mean, even if we're talking about striving towards immortality in the sense that we're striving towards ultimately eradicating human disease and human suffering, like that's a Christian goal. So I don't think there's incompatibility there. Let me throw it to Albert though and see what he wants to say, and then Ian.
Yeah, well, I guess I'll start by defining what I understand these terms to mean real quick. To me, transhumanism has been this kind of idea that humans evolve beyond our current state. Typically through, you could say, technology, if you're thinking of like a cyborg, where we're integrating tech into ourselves. You can also talk about a genetic way of doing that, where we're modifying our own genes. And in fact, we already do that to some extent. Whereas post-humanism is more so ascending beyond what it even means to be human. These are things like uploading your consciousness to a digital realm, for example. And then, yeah, there's perhaps the even further extreme where there's no humanity at all. We're just talking about synthetic consciousness. I don't believe that Christianity is incompatible with transhumanism. I don't know that it's necessarily something God wants or doesn't want, but our Bible actually does teach that we do reach a state of, well, it doesn't explicitly say transhumanism, but I don't know any other way to interpret it. In our final book in the Bible, Revelations, there's a verse, Revelations 9:6, and it says something along the lines of, and this is talking about, by the way, in the end times, this is in the future. It says something along the lines of, in those days, humans will long to die. They'll seek death, but they won't find it. To me, that means that reads as if we achieve some form of on earth or in this realm immortality. And it actually seems to imply that we not only achieve a sort of immortality, but one in which we can't even opt out of it. I don't know how you accomplish that without transhumanism personally. So I do think that it is almost expected. I'm not going to say necessarily whether a Christian has a viewpoint of whether it's good or not. But I don't think that we necessarily don't believe it's going to happen. Now, when you talk about why Christians might think that that is not something that can be sustained long term, I think even physicists would probably agree that you end up with something like the heat death of the universe through entropy. And so you inevitably die no matter what, whereas immortality in most Christians' minds probably means living truly forever. And that's something that can only happen either in the spiritual realm or in this realm, if God himself changes the laws of physics or does some other means of that. So that's probably where I would fall on that.
Okay, there's a lot of people who are going to want to jump in on this conversation. Again, I'm just going to say that the language here is just it's hard to really define. So I think some of the disagreements are really going to be about language. Ian had his hand up. I want to go to Ian, and then I'm going to go to Father Ray because he's popping in here. And then I've talked a few times to this account. I don't know who's on the account, but Christian transhumanism. I'll let you speak. But please, Ian, go ahead.
Well, just to quickly mention something Albert said there about the heat death, you may or may not know, there's this entire kind of early 20th century Christian theological concept of the omega point, which is fundamentally about humanity through its agency co-participating with God, defeating the heat death. Teilhard de Chardin was the heat death was really almost the main crux of his theology. He's kind of working around and responding to the heat death, and that's sort of where this idea of the omega point came from. But I just wanted to answer Lasson's questions. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. But to answer your first question, I would say, no, there's absolutely no reason that any Christian would oppose remedying any aspect of the fall. I think that any consequence of the fall, we have a moral duty to do everything that we can to mitigate or remove it. And that's how Christians have always behaved throughout history, doing everything we can to contribute to medicine, to science, to all kinds of infrastructure that improve human well-being. And there isn't any endpoint there. I think as long as we're not deconstructing aspects of our created nature that are positive goods, specifically ordained by God as goods, then we're moving in the right direction. If we're combating suffering and we're helping the least of these, and that includes, combating degenerative aging, coming up with any remedies that we can for any illnesses that exist as a result of the fall. And your last question was, why do we need Christianity? And that's a big conversation, obviously, but I'll just kind of throw out a few poorly formed thoughts in no particular order. And one is that Christians who are futurists have a meta ethic that secular futurists don't have. So, secular futurists will ultimately, even though it can sound like they're speaking in terms of moral mandates and moral duties, ultimately they'll fall back on sort of their personal taste. The Beth Connor debate. Ultimately, Beth would make these kind of big declarations of moral duty and cosmic mandates, and Connor would press him on certain specifics, and Beth would ultimately say, well, this is kind of my personal preference, which is really the best that a secular person can do. But Christians have an account of why we have the moral duties that we have. And that has tremendous practical consequences as well. I mean, in terms of who's more likely to succeed, the group of people who thinks that they have an objective moral duty and a cosmic and divine mandate to succeed, or people that just have kind of a certain set of personal tastes. I think history answers that question basically on every page. Look at just in recent history, Afghanistan. The U.S. spent trillions of dollars, in effect, creating this, artificial first world military structure and middle class, and it fell apart in just a couple of days because it was confronted with sincere religious belief. So in practical terms, religious belief and having a meta ethic makes a tremendous difference. And, just historically, I mentioned Teilhard a minute ago. Teilhard was a futurist and talked about subduing the universe and making matter serve consciousness well before the vast majority of thinkers that secular futurists today reference. Even before J.D. Bernal, he was writing down basically all of his key ideas in World War I. And then even before that, going back to the late 19th century, before any of the secular futurists were even alive, Nikolai Fyodorov was talking specifically about, we have a God-ordained mandate to fill the universe and colonize every planet in the universe. So you can just see how Christianity has in fact historically led to these futurist positions before secular people even arrived at them. The American philosopher of religion, Eric Steinhardt, if you don't want to take my word for this as a Christian, said that, and he's himself an atheist, but he said, look, all secular futurists have basically taken historically Christian ideas and desacralized them. So that's kind of what's happened historically, and I think that historical pattern is an argument that shows the philosophical importance of having a meta ethic, and that people who have a meta ethic are actually going to succeed in changing the world.
Father Ray, if you want to go ahead and jump in. Okay, he might be tied up at the second. Let's go to Christian transhumanism.
Hey guys, thanks for having me on. I'm Micah Redding. I'm the executive director of the Christian Transhumanist Association. So I just, as someone who does think transhumanism is a worthwhile term for Christians to use and so forth, I thought I would chime in. I totally agree with what Ian was saying about the history of this. In fact, Teilhard de Chardin was one of the first people to use the term transhuman and transhumanity. And he's talking about humanity in its relationship with God, which is this kind of process of transcending our kind of fallen human condition to the transcendent human condition of Christ. Right. And this is the kind of origin of these terms. Julian Huxley wrote the foreword posthumously of Teilhard de Chardin's, one of his books. And so basically, yeah, this is what we're trying to take as secular people. We're trying to figure out a secular version of this. And Julian Huxley is the one kind of credited with kicking off the secular transhumanist movement in modern times. This is a very long history of Christians involved in this stuff, going back to Francis Bacon in the 1600s, writing about science as the mission of God and longevity and so forth as coming out of this. And I think these terms like transhumanism and post-humanism kind of have to be reconfigured when we understand the biblical concept of what humanity is. At the 2019 Transvision conference in London, a sociologist named Steve Fuller stood up and said, transhumanism is always about the image of God. And I think that's right. It's that question. And when we ask, what does that mean in the biblical story, right? That's humans living to 900 years is part of what it means to be human. And is anticipated in Isaiah 65:20 as coming back in the future. So I think a lot of people would call that post-human if you were a human living to 900 years and, all this kind of stuff. But in the Bible, that's just humanity made in the image of God. So I think, that's all within the purview of what Christians are called to do and have historically understood themselves as being called to do.
Thank you for that. And I think Father Ray might be on again if you want to pipe in. Can you unmute, Father Ray?
Sorry, I've had to restart my phone twice because the space is cut out already in this conversation.
Twitter Spaces is like that. Anyway, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. There was an original. I missed how Revelation 9:6 was meant to apply here. My immediate reaction to, again, as you all are talking about, transhumanism can mean many things. The fundamental point of the Christian faith is that God was incarnate as a man, that the second person of the Trinity took on human flesh, and in so taking on human flesh, verified the goodness of the created order, verified the goodness of matter itself. And so to denigrate matter is one of the great errors and one of the great heresies of the first few centuries of the church, that was rejected as fundamentally incompatible with the truth of not only the incarnation of Jesus taking on human flesh, but the resurrection itself, that Jesus was resurrected in the body. So a view of using technology to transcend the human form, that's incompatible with Scripture. Now, what was said about using technology for the betterment of mankind, undoing the fall, personally, that's very true. I tend to prefer the language of continuing the work that Adam was commanded to do in the first place, that Adam was commanded to tend the garden, and to turn the whole earth, not just the Garden of Eden, this particular place, but that the whole earth would be cultivated to the glory of God. And that whatever we do technologically is part of cultivating the earth. And of course, expand that to the entire, to the solar system, to the universe, that mankind is to expand the kingdom of God to the outer limits of knowable space. But that is definitely part of our calling in doing the work that Adam was called to. Not only an undoing of the fall, but because of the resurrection of Jesus Christ, we are able to take up the gauntlet, take up the responsibility that was given Adam in the garden. So those are my responses to the comments that were made as I was on previously.
Appreciate it. And Singularity Hacker, go ahead.
Yeah, just real quick, I want to say, I think God pretty, the Bible pretty explicitly says after the fall that God prescribes the average length of man and shortens it, and it's not totally different than what we have now. And so I look at that and I say, I don't have any reason to think that we're going to start living to 200 years, right? So that kind of influences my thinking there. On another point, the questioner, who kind of brought this up a few minutes ago, his original question, there was an aspect of it I didn't think we totally touched on, and he said, well, why not make a heaven on earth, right? And, why can't we do that? And it made me think of Thomas Sowell's A Conflict of Visions. Fantastic book. And he talks about how seemingly disparate political views actually unify under one or two views of man. And those two views are the constrained view and the unconstrained. And what's crazy is when you look at the unconstrained view, the idea that man is infinitely pliable and, you can like maybe educate evil out of him, and it really evil and error is exogenous of man. It's not coming from him. You end up with people who, if you look at people who actually believe they could make a paradise on earth, these are the people who were basically murderers of millions and hundreds of millions of people. And really, to come back to the question of like, why do you need Christianity? It's because as Jesus said, sin doesn't come into a man by eating a certain way, but it flows from the heart. And the claim of the Bible is that there is only one person who can fix that malady, and it's the resurrected God-man, Jesus. And so that's the hope there. He's the only one, the one who's God and man, who can address the core sickness in the heart of man. And that's why we're looking for the resurrection and the paradise that only he can bring in that way.
Yeah, and I mean, again, that's why we're having these spaces. We're having these spaces because, like you said, non-Christians who are essentially trying to bring a paradise on earth, and I'm not talking about people who are working in medicine and obviously developing great tech, but people who have a vision of humanity and of the future that is fundamentally incompatible with Christianity. Well, it's just not true, and it's not going to work. That's why we need the Christians here. So I'm super happy that we're able to have these conversations. And just to give maybe briefly a little bit of insight into my thinking, transhumanism, it's like such a loaded word. And obviously, as we've talked here, I feel like we're all basically saying almost the same thing. Like, if we're going to define transhumanism in this way that has obviously a lot of historic Christian background, why would we reject that? We wouldn't, right? But again, because the word has developed in time and there's a secular aspect to it, so many Christians, I mean, maybe you guys don't in the same circles that I'm in, but if I throw transhumanism out there, they're going to choke. So that's really what scares me so much about the word. And what I kind of think EAC, because it's undefined, is almost a more useful word in the space, but obviously there's some negative aspects to EAC. I mean, that's really where my thinking is. I don't reject the Christian aspects of quote unquote transhumanism. It's just that the word is so difficult to define. Okay, a lot of people, I don't know who put their hand up first, Ian or Albert. Albert, go ahead, and then we'll jump to Ian.
Sure thing. And I just wanted to talk and touch on, and I'm probably, my words are going to maybe trip over each other a little bit, because the thing I want to express right now is more of a feeling rather than something I've concretely thought about a lot and put to words. But I'm going to try to answer the question as to why it is beneficial or even possibly necessary to have Christians involved in this movement, Christianity involved in this movement of futurism. My thinking goes like this. Whenever you're dealing with tech that completely changes the whole shape of the world, there is inherently built into it a sort of fingerprint of humanity that is based on the designer's principles and ethics and morals. Okay, so when you think about the modern world that the West kind of built, a huge portion of that, a majority I would even say, is influenced based on Christianity. Christianity was certainly the majority in a lot of these regions, thanks to Catholicism, the majority in a lot of these regions where innovation was occurring. And Christians have a unchanging moral framework that we have to abide by. This is God's morality, in a sense, and it's described in the Bible for us, and it doesn't change. So one thing we're seeing now in the West with the embracing of atheism is the people that are most staunch, and I'm not going to say this is everyone, I'm not classifying everyone, but I am talking statistics here. And so the people that tend to reject Christianity and reject God, I'm not talking about the agnostics, but the true atheists, they are faced with a dilemma where they have to create their own moral framework. And not only do they have to create their own moral framework, it's not allowed to be God's framework. Otherwise, they're agreeing with the thing they've rejected. And I think we're seeing some of that play out now, especially in America, where a ton of what society considers is moral and good is something that is new and manufactured by man. And it's being, it's at ends and at odds with God's morals described in the Bible, which is the traditional morals of the West. And so we're seeing a lot of decay from what we've normally held as like normal life, good life. Just look at Gemini, for example, Google's latest LLM release. It's insane how much what would traditionally be considered immoral fingerprinting, I'll say, is placed into that. And that's because it's taking in this new framework of morals and ethics that have been constructed by man. And these are ultimately doomed to fail, in my opinion, long term. But even if you don't believe in my opinion, you can just look at the history of the West and see nations where Christianity was in majority, I'll say, the innovations all led towards kind of moral principles that I think we all agree with inherently as we have the Spirit of God in us. And so that's my opinion, I guess. Obviously, a lot of people are going to disagree, but I think that's my opinion, where it's the moral duty of Christians to be involved in building this. AI is going to spread across the whole world. It's going to be in every single facet in the future. And so if we can't get our ethics and morals kind of built into that framework from the start, well, then what is going to fill that space? And it's going to be these human constructed morals and ethics. And those have so far been disastrous, in my opinion. And I think a lot of people agree with that, even if they're not Christian. But, I'll leave that to each individual.
Yeah, Ian, go ahead, jump in.
Strongly agree with everything Albert said. I have a quick question for Micah. Micah, I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on this. I really strongly agreed with the premise of what you said just a moment ago, that according to a biblical view of humanity, living to 900 years is encompassed within, what it means to be created humanity. And that's not, as you pointed out, that's not transcending humanity according to a biblical view of what it is to be a created human being, right? So that's not transhumanism, quote unquote. If that's the case, am I wrong to think that you have sort of staked your flag to the view that what we ought to support as Christians is transcending humanity? It seems to me that that's what Christian transhumanism means.
So what I hear you asking is, does transhumanism mean transcending humanity? And I think Scripture uses humanity in both a negative and a positive kind of way, right? There's, I think Paul says in the New Testament, if you bite and devour each other, you are merely human. And so there is a sense in which we are transcending our humanity in partnership with God. And there is another sense in which our humanity is unlimited and infinite because it has been taken up into God in the person of Jesus Christ. And so, what I understand transhumanism in this context, or Christian transhumanism, to mean is that we are exploring the range of what it means to be human made in the image of God, which is, I think, much broader than we have maybe considered. We know that, like we were talking about, that could be 900-year lifespans. It could be other things. We know it can be like the humanity of Christ, which can ascend into the sky or appear and disappear from locked rooms, this kind of stuff. All of that is potentially in our future. And so we're talking about transcending humanity as it is now in partnership with God, but not transcending in humanity in the sense of leaving behind our history, our connection to to the created order, to the incarnation of Christ, and so on.
Okay, I'm not really sure where to direct the conversation from there. I struggle with the language, I guess, and so I'm a little bit sometimes I'm a little bit lost in exactly what we're saying all the time. Who unmuted?
I
Okay.
did, sir.
Yeah, if you wanted to jump in, I can throw it to you. I will just say, though, again, to Albert's point, and I think kind of the way this conversation is going, like, I do just see these technologies inevitably developing. Like Albert said, AGI is going to spread through the world. And so we have to come to terms with that. But I also think that Christianity is inevitably going to spread through all of creation. Therefore, if Christianity spreads through all of creation and we build these technologies that maybe help us embody what it means to be human in stronger and stronger ways, therefore the technology is good, right? Because if Christianity is our endpoint, then the technology if the technology is truly inevitable, it can't be incompatible with Christianity. We have to reconcile that. So, and I want to get more people on to have this kind of transhumanism conversation. I don't know if we're entirely equipped to dive too deep into it, but I do think maybe the largest aspect of controversy is going to be on this concept of substrate independence if we're going to somehow transcend the biological form of humanity. That might be a topic of controversy. I just don't know if we can really dive too deep into it. But I appreciate your points, Micah, and I can't really say I have anything I've disagreed with anything you've said so far. Dan, why don't you go ahead and jump in?
Yeah, sweet. I just have a question more for everybody. Would we also agree that, say, transhumanism would also, be us transcending bodily form, when we start using Apple Vision Pros, and like we have an AI tool we've developed for schools where you can literally just scan a website and we import all the data, all support user bases into one single, AI chatbot. Like we could effectively do that for St. Paul or Jesus, right? And you could just talk to AI Jesus. Like, what do you guys think of all that sort of stuff? Because like you could effectively, like if anyone's spent any time on the Apple Vision Pro, like you can do FaceTime, right? And it's the people in the chat look kind of weird. They look sort of semi-real, not really that real, but this is the worst it'll ever be. If you think about even our conversation we're having right now, where we could all effectively, like we could build like a massive 16 chapel, right? And then all of us in this chat room could be sitting in there having a chat like we are there in real life. Like I feel like the virtual worlds that will be built in the next 3 years will start to compete with the real world. And is that transhumanism and sort of what, I'm just curious for us to, is that, what do you guys think of that?
Go ahead, Albert.
Yeah, so you brought up some great questions. I personally actually view the prefix trans to mean more like transitional human. Obviously, it can be interpreted either way in the Latin, but I view it as a spectrum where we're transitioning from our purely, I'll say, earth or dust state to adding more earth and dust onto that. Now, we're never going to escape that. We're made in the image of God through our spirit, our souls. So everything else is dust to dust, so to speak, even if we extract silicon and try and get away with it that way. It's a great question you bring up, though, with the Apple Vision Pro and whatnot. And this is a classical debate of, we already have cell phones on us at all time, and we're connected to the internet, and we can kind of speak telepathically in a sense by sending text messages. So are we already on that spectrum unknowingly? I would argue yes. I think we're in a constant state of transhumanism ever since the invention of technology. I don't think it's inherently a bad thing. Now, I'm personally a little conflicted when it comes to post-humanism. I personally don't think I would go down that route. But as for transhumanism, I do think we're all already, in a sense, transhumanist. And I think Christians are also going to have a lot of, they're going to have to face a lot of internal conflicts that are a result of their own understanding. And so we're going to have to turn to the Bible and look for a framework for a lot of this stuff. But it's interesting you brought up the example of humans being in a VR space, perhaps listening to Jesus speak a parable or something, or maybe even interacting with him. I actually have a friend who created a LLM app. I think it's called Christo AI. And I was against this when I first heard about it because it just rubbed me the wrong way. But he explained it. It's essentially an AI that assumes the role of Jesus. Now, this isn't to say anything, heresy or whatever that it is Jesus, but rather a tool for people to talk to something and see what the perspective and interpretations would be through that framework. And I believe it even references Bible verses as it brings that up. So, it's not claiming to be God per se. Even still, I felt a little uncomfortable with it. But he shared with me that he's actually had a few atheist friends who used it, or I should say agnostic friends who used it, and have converted to Christianity from that tool and from having those conversations with the LLM pretending to be Jesus. So, and it's funny, humans are told to try and portray Jesus as well. So when I think about it through that framework, he's actually created a device that's doing some of the commands that we're supposed to do. So initially that rubbed me the wrong way. And then once I heard of the fruits that it bore, I was actually forced to kind of think about it a little more and maybe change my mindset. I'm not sure where I fall still on that, but I think more and more things like that are going to pop up where Christians are going to initially be rubbed the wrong way. But as we can go back to the Bible and kind of think about how we're supposed to properly think about these things and what the truth are, I think we'll hopefully change our mind on a few things. And the main goal should be spreading the message of the gospel. So that's what I wanted to say there.
I'd probably just add to that I think maybe to make people somewhat happy with it is maybe Jesus could just bring up Bible verses that would almost be universally accepted. I think maybe the boundary line, lots of people would probably agree with, would be crossing the line would be if Jesus starts just freeballing, different words that wouldn't necessarily, like there's a risk obviously that the AI could just start talking nonsense, right? I actually told this to my dad last night. He's an elder at a church. And initially he said, I said, look, the reality is, within a couple of years, VR and AR will be so prevalent, like there will be AR, VR churches, right? And the place will look amazing. And just like we're having a conversation, like I'm in, down under Australia, it's 9:00 in the morning here, and you're, most of you in the US. Like it's incredible. We're connecting over the internet, and I just see like the connections. We're accelerating at such a pace that we're 10xing every 3 months at the moment in terms of speed of development. If anything, humanity is just getting drawn closer and closer together, where we almost just become seconds away from anything. Like I think the church needs to be really ahead of this, because I think, as you said, like it's going to freak a lot of people out. I was speaking to my wife about it. Her cousin does a lot of work in missions in India. And if you look at like the 11 Labs tech, where they recently, like you can literally live dub someone's voice, keep their tone, like even language will be non-existent, I think, in 10 years. Like, you know what I mean? Like you could literally just speak to someone and you're speaking as if you learnt their language natively. like some of the technology coming is just absolutely awesome. I think, I guess the danger is obviously where we can obviously use it the wrong way. Like, what would be your idea of how to use it fruitfully?
Yeah, I don't know how excited some people are going to be about virtual reality churches specifically. It's funny though. We have I have a podcast, and we've mainly been a blockchain podcast, but ever since AI popped off, and then some of the tech, we've kind of done the gambit, virtual reality, AI. And we did have we had a character on who was talking about some virtual reality projects that he was working on in the church, and that was definitely a controversial point in our podcast. I think particularly with some of these, we have some Catholics here, and Father Ray is Anglican, some that are a little more deeper into sacramental theology. And this is kind of my question too, especially when we're talking about transcending humanity. If you're imagining uploading your consciousness to the cloud, how does that square with sacramental theology? How are you receiving, the Eucharist in that state? I think that's where Christians are going to maybe question exactly what this really means. So, for example, virtual reality churches, I think it's great that we can do live streams, and we can communicate, and I think the internet is a great coordination mechanism, and in many ways actually images what the church's goal ultimately is, which is to unite humanity, right? The more we can kind of promote these coordination mechanisms of the internet and of capital and of the church and unify humanity, this is good. But specifically when it comes to churches, I do think there's actually something fundamental to Christianity which requires us to gather in person with fellow believers in the material world, if you will. And I don't really have all my language. Maybe I don't even have the thought totally developed yet. But I think there's definitely something there. I don't see anybody's hand up, but if anybody wanted to jump in and maybe okay, so I did see that, Scott, you joined the speaker panel, and you haven't had a chance to introduce yourself yet. So why don't you go ahead and jump in and tell us what you do in the space, if you won't mind, and then go ahead and join the convo.
Hi guys, I'm actually one of the Roman Catholics, I guess, in the chat. I don't do anything particular, I guess, in this world, except that I work for a software company with customers all over the world who use our product called ifttt.com. We've rolled out some AI features, kind of using some of the OpenAI stuff recently, and it's still fairly rudimentary, but I've been very interested about this discussion ever since our company's kind of started to make that push. But instead of thinking about, so I'm not really a gamer. I'm not somebody that spends a lot of time on Discord stuff. I have a lot of friends who are, nowadays since college and stuff. I'm 33, but I have friends scattered all over the country and stuff. So I do keep in touch virtually with a lot of people, but I have recently in the last year, made friends with people who are in my new church since I moved to a new town. And anyway, what I'm saying is, instead of thinking of it as a requirement for people to gather, Christians to gather in person and worship and support each other, don't we enjoy that? Don't we want that? Are you, anyone who's been commenting on this stuff, I'm curious to know, do you enjoy the idea, at least conceptually or in reality, of a virtual reality church? Do you get enjoyment out of the idea of hanging out with friends in a virtual place? Don't you like sitting together, touching your friends, shaking their hands, touching their shoulders, grabbing them, eating with them out of the same, dish, like gathering together for food, smoking cigars together? Like, I don't even know, whatever it is. Those are things that I find rich and enjoyable and meaningful, much more than the time I spend, staring at the screen, obviously. So, I just wonder aesthetically alone, or what are we giving up if we're, I'm making kind of a very Luddite argument, I guess, which is perhaps boring to you all, but point is, I'm curious as to, does this seem exciting and enticing as much as some of you have led on, or, I'm not sure. Just curious to know more thoughts on that. And then, I'm just curious about the idea. Someone mentioned this is inevitable, therefore it should be something that we should pursue. I do believe that was a good point to say, like, this is coming, or people are going to at least try. Somebody's going to try. Maybe Christians should make a stand on it, or be involved in it, or try to influence it. And I see that argument. But I also know, I don't know the famous quote who said it, but somebody said, there's a writer who said, certainly advanced technology starts to appear like magic. And I know that things like witchcraft are definitely prohibited for Christians. So is there a point where, if the technology, just because it exists, does that mean we need to pursue it? That's all I have to say.
Well, I see Singularity Hacker has his hand up. I did engage in a conversation with somebody who probably shares some of your views, a little more Luddite. And she, when Apple Pro came out, she posted the photo of that and is like, this is just horrible. It's dehumanizing technology. This guy was sitting on a bus, probably New York City Metro, with Apple Pro glasses on, goggles on. And to her, that was less than human because he wasn't engaging with the humans who were around him in the physical world. And my take on that is there's a difference. There's obviously good to communicating with humans in physical reality, but we also have to recognize that there's a lot of good that has come from the internet, and the fact that I could even communicate with this lady over the internet, who lived, I think she lives up in New York. We would, in a previous time, we would live in totally separate worlds, totally unaware of each other's existence. And I think it's almost foundational to what the church is as a global unifying force for humanity, that we are inventing technologies that now allow us to coordinate with humans across the globe and, ultimately probably across the universe. And I think there's a lot of good to that. I also think there's a lot of good to what we do offline in physical existence. So I don't think it necessarily has to be one or the other. And I think there's a mistake to not recognize the good that is in both. Singularity Hacker, go ahead.
Yeah, I think this is an awesome analogy that captures like a microcosm of the whole situation. And so let's say this is the issue of telepresence, like and virtual worlds and church attendance. And Jesus says, often as you come together, do this in remembrance of me. And it's like, is that coming together? And the statement of like, well, don't we enjoy coming together? It's interesting because it's like, we should and we do enjoy coming together, but we also are very prone to isolate and to want to be seen, and like I remember the post-COVID, everyone got used to dialing in online on YouTube, the live stream or whatever. And like the pastor saying, hey, we're encouraging you to come back. And it was a long haul, to kind of break those patterns because, frankly, it's just easier to sit in your pajamas on the blanket on the couch. We're kind of America entertainment oriented, serve me, whatever's convenient for me. And so this is one of those things where the same technology that's going to allow us to beam the good news to people who are shut-ins or who are injured or all around the planet is also the temptation to say, well, I don't really need to go anywhere because I get to view it here. And so I think it's the two sides of the same knife,
Okay, well, I don't know if the conversation maybe is lulling. We don't have to go too long. I think we've done a lot of good with the conversation we've already had. And, we can bring up examples, all sorts of examples, probably all evening, all day, about things that could potentially be negative about technology. But again, I just really think that it's important for us to convey a explicitly positive message for Christians. And I'm glad that we've done a lot of that here in this space. And to maybe add on to that too, I appreciate that we're able to gather together and maybe talk about some of the dangers of technology. But if that's the focus of our conversation, who are we maybe telling to slow down? Well, in this space, we're telling Christians to slow down, right? And so I think maybe sometimes we have the tendency to be overly cautious in Christianity and not really take stock of what we need to do, and that is to build the future. So I appreciate having the discussions about potentially negative outcomes, potentially things that we should be careful about. But if the non-Christians are building, we need to be building, you know? So, and there's really no other way to look at that. So if you're afraid of the technology, if you think there's potentially bad use cases for the technology, well, you have to do everything you can, and we have to do everything we can to build a better future. So let's not get too caught up on the pessimistic sides of things. Let's not get too caught up on the fears. Like Albert said, you know, mistranslations or maybe some biased translations that encourage Christians to fear. We need to consider that we actually have a lot of optimism deeply rooted in the theology of Christianity and in the Word of God. And we need to take hold of that, and we need to spread that message as loud and as hard as we can in this space. And the more we can do that, the better outcomes we're going to see. I strongly believe that. Maybe some people disagree, but I personally, that's kind of what I've decided my goal here is to encourage Christians to be optimistic and to build the future. So maybe we pass it around. I don't know if some people have some more thoughts they want to kind of add on to that. I know you had your hand up, Dan. I didn't mean to forestall you if you wanted to add something to that previous convo we were having. Why don't you go ahead? And
Good. I was just saying, just as we're talking, like you said, you're in Florida, Connor?
I am.
Yeah, like imagine if this Twitter Spaces, right, was like a virtual fireside chat, and you know, when we sign into your hometown, we're on the beach, you know, in Miami, all talking about Jesus, and then you could log into India, and then there's, you know, Christians talking there. Like you could literally just jump around the world and join different Christian groups. Ideas could spread really fast. Like that's I'd say an inherent positive thing. And then obviously you can then bring those cool ideas back to your home church and still have that physical gathering. But like we're effectively doing this already right now, but it's just with audio. Like how cool would it be that we're all able to see each other and interact and see our expressions and nod and have essentially a fireside chat 24/7. I think that'd be just the coolest thing.
Yeah, 100% agree. You know, and I like having these conversations. We're going to have more of them. I think I'm going to try to do it like every 2 weeks. And actually, I'm super excited because I've been talking to this, Ian, mentioned Nikolai, so he actually pronounced the last name correctly, I'm imagining, because that's the way Ian is.
Fyodorov.
Okay. I call him Fedorov because that's how it's spelled.
I promise it's Fyodorov.
I believe you. I do. So, and he's a Russian cosmicist, or probably, I think, pre-cosmicist, but a Christian Russian Orthodox thinker in the 1800s that had a lot to say about Christianity and Christian theology. And I think it's so incredible that Christians were thinking about Christian futurism all the way back in the 1800s. So we're going to I think we're going to try to organize a space, maybe in another 2 weeks. We have Easter coming up. So if I do 3 weeks, at some point there's going to probably need to be a 3-week break because nobody's going to join over Easter. So we either do next 2 weeks or maybe another 3 weeks. Talk about Nikolai Fedorov, or I still can't pronounce it anyway. And Teilhard de Chardin, another excellent Christian thinker in this space. And I don't know, maybe we can add some more, but maybe those two. I think that might be the focus of the next conversation. We'll see, but I'm super excited to see what they have to contribute to the conversation. Okay, well, Albert, and I know Singularity Hack, maybe he just had to jump off, but Albert was one of my initial panelists. So maybe you want to give some like final words and tell us kind of, you know, whatever message you want to leave us with.
Sure thing. Yeah. My main thing is I just think if you're heading towards an inevitable future, that is, we're not going to be able to stop this type of AI progression. You need to be on the optimistic side, and you need to be wanting to put your views into that. If you think your views are honorable, that is. So I do encourage Christian founders to continue to build in the AI arms race, so to speak. And I think it's a good thing. I do think personally that the future is going to be beautiful. I'm excited for it. And I also just wanted to say one final thing. If there's any non-Christians in this conversation, even if you're listening in the recording later on, feel free to reach out to me through DM if you're interested in Christianity or salvation, or if you have any questions. I'm sure any of the speakers here would be happy to answer those. I will definitely respond if you DM me.
God bless everyone. Everybody have a great Sunday. Have a great week and continue building.